Yeah, interesting.
So
And
I
I guess
learned that.
ballet and military are more kind of regimented and strict, like they have like their own styles. But I guess modern dances, would you say it's more free moving and flowing and kind of spontaneous? And yeah, how does that differ? And
Well,
do all of these relate to Stoicism at all, or is it kind of just separate?
no, not everything relates to Stoicism in the world.
Okay.
Thank
I was
God.
just curious about your work.
Nor does everything relate to God in the world, or everything doesn't relate to me. That's even a bigger one. Forget that idea. We should just get rid of that. Modern dance was a break from the prettiness of ballet. Ballet's pretty, and it also, as we know it, it's excruciatingly hard. I'm not a ballet dancer, and I've never done toe, but you know, dancing on toe is
Yeah.
really excruciating.
Welcome to the Feminine Stoic. This upcoming book features 365 women who naturally embody the essence of Stoicism without having necessarily heard of it. The idea was inspired by The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. I had C-PTSD, and my friend John told me to check it out. I was like, no, thank you. I thought it was something just for strong, silent men, and I honestly love being girly. He said it has nothing to do with gender, and he sent me a copy of the book. I forgot about it for a year, then I reached such a low point that I figured, why not? Of course, I ended up loving it, and it actually did change my life. I'm still not the best at being stoic, but it's helped a lot. That being said, I easily saw that all 365 days of the Daily Stoic feature men. And while that's great, I wanted to bring this book to women and girls too, since Stoicism is for everyone. Nancy Sherman is an ethicist and professor whose work spans ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, focused on the timeless topics of character, emotion, and moral life. Her recent focus on Stoic ethics culminated in Stoic wisdom, ancient lessons for modern resilience, and she has just completed How to Have a Soul, what Aristotle teaches us about lasting happiness. For decades, she has worked with the U.S. military on Stoicism, post-traumatic stress, and moral injury, having served as the inaugural chair of ethics at the U.S. Naval Academy in the mid-90s. Her interest in the military was shaped by her father's World War II service, leading to her trilogy Stoic Warriors, The Untold War, and Afterwar, that explores the moral experience of war and homecoming. With training in psychotherapy, she has also examined how emotional expression and social cohesion emerge through movement, including dance and military march, from her work as a fellow at the NYU Center for Ballet and the Arts. Sherman is a distinguished professor of philosophy at Georgetown and previously taught at Yale. Beyond her academic life, she is an avid swimmer, dancer, gardener, and lover of the outdoors. So, welcome, Nancy. Happy to have you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Happy to be here.
Yay. So, yeah, I sent you a couple of questions. Would love to dive in and jump in, hear your thoughts on a couple of the passages from the ancient Stoics. Just as the nature of rational things has given to each person their rational powers, so it also gives us this power. Just as nature turns to its own purpose in any obstacle or any opposition, sets its place in the destined order, and co-opts it, so every rational person can convert any obstacle into the raw material for their own purposes. So yeah, I would love to hear something about your own life and background.
Well,
Yeah.
first of all, the quote is an exaggerated one. The Stoics like to talk a lot about vulnerability and fragility, we would say, and give us lots of tools for facing challenges in life. It would be hard to think that any obstacle could be used for your own purpose and to advantage. We certainly face tragic luck all the time, and there's a whole field in philosophy to do with moral luck. Things that happen to us that aren't what we would like, whether it has to do with where we're born, where it has to do with who our parents are, whether it has to do with actions that get foiled somehow by weather, disasters, war, who knows what. A bad day taking an exam, as my students will tell me tomorrow. That said, the Stoics try to arm you against some of the vulnerabilities by asking you to prepare in advance for what you could do to forestall some of the worst outcomes. Think a little bit about the worst kinds of things that could happen. Rehearse them in your mind. If it's going to be crowded, says Epictetus, at the bathhouses, then remind yourself there'll be a lot of pickpockets and jostling and people moving around. And you'll want to keep that in mind before you blow up and get overly angry. And so Marcus, who read Epictetus, interestingly, Epictetus was an enslaved Roman. Marcus was an emperor, writing these meditations on the shores of the Danube in a very protracted 8-year war, in which he probably was very ill some of that time. And he's writing these in his tent at night. He's thinking a little bit about how he can fortify himself, given all the circumstances, in his case, of leadership and military campaign. So it was the popular philosophy of the day. I wouldn't necessarily say it was the best philosophy of the day. It's certainly not the only ancient philosophy of the day. Preceding the Stoics were Socrates in Athens, Plato, his student, who wrote remarkable dialogues. Socrates never penned a word. He was an oral philosopher. And my favorite, Aristotle, really the titan of the ancient world. But the Stoics were the household philosophy, especially the Roman Stoics. And Marcus would have been trained by a tutor who, when he was young, came into the house and had him do lessons. And sort of, as I say, an irony of history that an emperor should turn to an enslaved person for some wisdom. But that was sort of how it went. And I think because they're just little meditations. They're one-offs. It's not particularly systematic. It's a little here, a little there, a little here, a little there. They're not arguments. They're more like inspirational wisdom. And I suspect that's part of the appeal, inspirational wisdom. Marcus is not a philosopher by any means, not at all. He is the military leader. And he's an emperor. Yeah. And he himself is interested in glory and fame. His statue still is in Rome. It's one of the few that survives. That said, like many, he's trying to humble himself and trying to tamp down some of his own ambition and some of his vainglory and pride.
So he becomes a philosopher a little bit in the meantime. Do you have any examples from your own background and experiences, your own life that this quote resonates with?
Seneca talks a lot about disturbed lives and lacking self-control. And sure, we all need more control when it comes to anger management. That's one of his huge worries. I think he was surrounded by people who were enraged a lot of the time, and he was too. He's constantly cautioning himself about screaming at servants and, throwing them into the shark pit, so to speak, if they break a crystal goblet. And he meditates quietly at night. And I think, sure, all of us need a little anger control. That is the emotion he's most worried about, how you get disturbed by your emotions. He's thinking probably of Nero. He was an advisor to Nero. He was a court minister and a speechwriter from early on. And so he's dealing with an enraged guy who has a ton of power, who kills people left and right, including Seneca will himself be...
Oh, Emperor Nero, you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Nero.
The death of Seneca.
Oh, yeah. Seneca works for Nero. And he's his educator. Seneca is his educator. So he writes a remarkable set of essays on anger. But also in retirement, he writes the moral letters. And I think the lessons about anger are ones we all could take heed to. Think a little bit before you get enraged. What is it the Stoics have a very advanced view of emotions, which I subscribe to. What is the object of your emotion? Who? What's the action? Or what did they do? What's the thought? What's the belief that you have? They did something wrong to you, offended you. Or it could be a system. They're not thinking about systematic injustice. but I sure do. I think I look around and there's a ton of systematic injustice. There's
Yeah.
injustice toward all sorts of people. It's flaring up in unruly ways by very, very public leaders at the moment. And they are not giving us lessons in anger control. If anything, they're
No, definitely
giving,
not Stoic.
giving us lessons in the reverse.
So I saw that you were inspired by your father and your position at the Naval Academy, the U.S. Naval Academy. But yeah, I was wondering how you got so involved with research with military and the war outside of that. Like, do you have, some specific examples or service members you talked to in the military that kind of helped really inspire that passion?
Well, I was brought to the Naval Academy several decades ago to become their first chair in ethics because of a cheating scandal in one of their classes, brigade-wide required course called electrical engineering. And 133 midshipmen, cadets, they would be called at West Point, but at the Naval Academy, they're called midshipmen, were implicated. Whether or not all of them cheated was brought into question, but a number probably did. And it was huge, investigations that were nationwide. And it brought down a superintendent of the academy. So that's the president of the academy, you might say the university. And I started teaching for about 3 years at the Naval Academy. And my colleagues were, by and large, pretty senior officers. Some were admirals, some were generals, some were colonels, and they had served. At that time, they served this was before Iraq, Afghanistan. Some served in Vietnam, and some served in the first Gulf War, some served even in Panama. And they were trying to formulate how to think about the ethics of going to war, of being in war, of just war. These are old ancient topics. Theories of just war. They're very much in the air right now about what counts as a just strike, when there are boat people who are dangling on a boat outside the coast waters of Venezuela. We're talking about who's a target and who isn't a target, and what your responsibility is. So these are things I taught, and every person that goes to a military academy or not needs to know this stuff. But in addition, when we got toward the end of the course, I taught some historical texts, and one of them was Epictetus, in part because one of their own, a guy named James Stockdale, Admiral James Stockdale, was a pilot in Vietnam who had himself gone to Stanford for a master's, and he was shot down. And he ended up being in prison for 7.5 years, held by the North Vietnamese at the time in Hanoi. And he was along with John McCain, who many might know in the audience. And he had been given, prior to being shot down, while he was at Stanford, a little book, which was the Enchiridion, the handbook by Epictetus.
Yes.
He said, to his advisor, what does a martini drinking, golf playing naval aviator need with a book like that? I mean, he was academically minded, intellectually minded, but even so, he memorized it. Nights are long I've been on a carrier, on a USS carrier, and it came in handy when he was shot down. And he said something like, 5.5 years down there, I'm leaving the world of technology and I'm entering the world of Epictetus, as he parachuted down and then was captured.
Yeah.
And pummeled and
Endured torture.
Yeah, he endured enormous torture. So many of my officers and students knew his story. He was a naval officer, and they resonated with it. And they resonated with Epictetus is really easy to read, easier than some other philosophy. And so I said, this is my philosophy. I couldn't get it. Why are they so keen on this? Why? And I worried, actually, because I have a clinical background as well. I've done psychotherapy training, and psychoanalysis training. I haven't seen patients, but I knew enough to be worried. I was worried about the blessings and curses of Stoicism. And the blessings were that it might protect you from some vulnerability, as the earlier quote suggested that we were reviewing. But it also gives you a sense that you're fully protected, like you wear this invisible armor. and nothing can happen to me. Well, that's just false. I was dealing with individuals, the Vietnam veterans, so these are older guys at this point, who they saw a lot of horrible, horrible stuff. And they knew some were in prison. They could still smell the horrible smells, and they knew what it was like to be a POW. And they knew what it was like to not have freedom. And they wanted to toughen themselves up. That is actually what every young cadet or midshipman wants to do. Suck it up and truck on. You got so much deprivation in your life.
Old school Stoicism.
Figure it out.
Right.
Yeah, figure it out. So I worried about that as the all or nothing mentality. I didn't want to see these young 18 to 22-year-olds not knowing how to deal with their emotions. I also didn't want to see women who were at that point 20% or so, the Naval Academy, the numbers may have changed under the current administration, but they came in maybe 2016. I can't actually remember the dates, so I'll leave that behind. But when the first class was admitted, and they definitely felt sometimes they were abused, sometimes they were harassed, sometimes they weren't taken seriously enough. Could they get all the postings they wanted, the top postings? I want to be a Marine, but, will the Marines let me in, that kind of thing. So I thought, I want to write a book about the blessings and curses of Stoicism. So I wrote a book called Stoic Warriors.
Oh, sorry, interrupt on that point. Is it for the blessings and the curse? Is it the curse part? Is it a little bit the misinterpretation or misunderstandings of Stoicism? Or do you think the curse is within Stoicism? Or
Both.
of Stoicism?
Anyone who works on historical texts know that you're an interpreter. You're always an interpreter. And so there's a lot of cherry picking, you might say. But there's, and so a lot of people just go for the armor. The quotes you gave me a moment ago, thinking about that, those are about armor. It's essentially about how do you toughen yourself up in the face of vulnerabilities, or misfortune or bad luck or tragic luck. Take charge, be resilient. But you can't be resilient against everything. You just can't. Human resilience depends on each other, supportive structures, community,
the environment.
Yeah, and any military person knows that. You take care of your buddies. You bring your buddies home. That is what it's about. You cover each other's back. And they knew that. But they also knew, here they are, they're doing these impossible tasks, and it requires enormous stamina, toughness. So I wanted to get them thinking harder about that. So that's partly how that began. I wanted to find ways of reading the texts, deepening the texts, exposing the texts that weren't cheap, that weren't just tough it up and suck it up and truck on. That just seemed to me so wrong, both as a way of reading the subtleties of these texts, also as a life lesson. I didn't want to send anyone out who thought that was the end of the story. That would be
seems like
a curse.
It seems like you really got to know these people in the military and empathize with them and saw their own vulnerabilities even hidden behind those big tough shields. So it seemed like you felt a calling of sorts to kind of use Stoicism in your work to help alleviate some of that suffering that that mentality had.
So the two subsequent books in that trilogy of military books, one was called The Untold War and the next one was called After War. And they came out, and somewhere they are on my shelf, maybe there. I see After War, the red cover, and I see a poster there, and I see The Untold War in the corner there in a smaller edition. And those books were very much written when I was back at Georgetown. I was on secondment to the Naval Academy for 3 years, but I was still a Georgetown faculty. And I went back to Georgetown, and all of a sudden, we were getting veterans from the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and they were in my classes, and they were young. Some of them didn't have first degrees. They became a Marine or enlisted without going to college. Others were master's students who or colonels even, who had gone and came back and were suffering hard. They lost buddies. They felt they were responsible for helping those individuals, that they shouldn't have survived.
A lot of guilt and
enormous survivor guilt. And they would go in my neighborhood. I live near Walter Reed in Bethesda, where there were a lot of returning warriors who were badly, badly injured. And sometimes I would go visit with them, and the guilt was enormous. So I wanted to understand.
It's very personal for you, to know
what they were going through, and they were in my classes. Several became journalists, war journalists. I mean, embedded war journalists for the Washington Post and New York Times. So they were up close and in this, and and they had told me stories, and it wasn't just stories. They told their story, and telling their story was so therapeutic for them. They went to war and came home, and then went back to war to become journalists. So that's an interesting issue. They didn't necessarily leave war.
They didn't take the comfortable way out, and so they went back into the fire. I wanted to talk about at this point too. It's a little bit outside of the military, but so PTSD, as you may know, actually affects more women than men. But a lot of people still think of, war and the military when they think of PTSD. Why do you think that is? PTSD affects, I believe, 10% of women actually, and 4% of men.
Well, there's an interesting backstory here, which I sometimes teach. The diagnosis of PTSD came out in 1980 in the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, and it came out post-Vietnam. And people were coming home from Vietnam with reactions to trauma. And some of it was studied up in Boston. And some of it was studied at Brigham and Women's. I actually gave birth in Brigham and Women's, so I know the hospital well. And Judith Herman was a psychiatrist working there. And she noticed that a lot of women she was seeing at the time in her practice or at Brigham and Women were rape victims who were suffering from what others who were also coming through the VAs, they call it the Boston VA, and other VAs, were suffering trauma reactions. And she wrote a very influential book called, I think it's called Fear and Trauma, or Trauma and Fear, one of either order, I can't recall, which essentially developed the account that what she was seeing in rape victims in Boston was what colleagues were seeing in returning veterans, and it was the same phenomenon. And so it has been documented, it has been written. There are lots of people that do CBT. I'm not a therapist who works with individuals, tons of them talk about post-traumatic stress for all sorts of victims. You could be a firefighter, you could be a hospital worker, you could be on the floors of a hospital as a nurse working in COVID and not being able to help all your patients or get this during the current shutdowns. There were doctors that could not get test tubes. I live near the NIH. People couldn't get test tubes to be able to run lab tests on patients. So that all could trigger stuff, independent of going to war. So war exposure is by no means the only stressor. The Vietnam population was studied. I mean, it was also a difficult time. That was a draft war. These were not enlisted. A lot were not enlisted. It was a war I knew well in my period of time in university. And many of my colleagues, close friends, had to decide, do we want to fight this war or not? And it was a losing battle. That war was not going to be one. So people not only came home from war broken when they went, there was a sense of defeat that we were not fighting just war. It had been fought by the French and Chinese. So anyway, but women were also part of that story. There were women nurses. There were women doctors. There were women in military stateside who were affected. And a lot of my work is not just on post-traumatic stress. Most of it's on moral injury. the suffering that goes on that isn't to do with fear, but it have very, very similar symptoms, but has to do with a sense of shattered morality. Did I do the right thing? Was I responsible? Was I the guilty party? Why did I survive in that person? I'm survivor
Right.
guilt, but many
These are
more,
tough decisions. Yeah,
yeah,
they're
but
making
many, many
fighting for their
more
country. Yeah.
complexities. I killed part of the collateral, a horrible word, but part of the foreseen but unintended result were civilian deaths. I didn't want to kill those civilians at the checkpoint. I didn't at all want to do it, but I ordered the rules of engagement, 3 warnings at the concertina wire. And if they don't stop, then they're going through the checkpoint. And the next thing is the base. So
And
you
sometimes I imagine there
open
would be
fire.
chaos and confusion.
You open fire. It's not just fog of
Right.
war. You open fire and you give a command to open fire.
So yeah, I know your focus is more on military and the war. So in terms of why people associate PTSD more with men versus women, maybe just a cultural dynamic or phenomenon.
Medically, men are often studied more than women. That's just a common medical fact.
Mhm, mhm.
The research often is on men, not women, but that's a horrible prejudice in science.
Yeah, that could be part of the, bias or, misunderstanding too. But yeah, I realize you said your focus is more on moral injury. But in terms of C-PTSD, did you kind of work with, people in the military about that too? And, trying to have Stoicism help alleviate both PTSD and C-PTSD in your
By
teaching?
C-PTSD, you mean chronic?
Complex.
Complex. So, yeah.
Repeated trauma that went over a long duration.
I did not treat individuals, so I wouldn't
Right.
even begin, nor would I ever recommend Stoicism as a treatment.
Not as a treatment
It's
medically.
or even a way of thinking about what you're responsible for and what you're not responsible for. If
You don't think so?
anything,
I thought Stoicism was a huge part of that. And also, yeah, like the basis
some
for most of
people
your
think
work.
that, but that is not my view. It's related to, it has the Stoics, the Greek Stoics were, and Cicero, who was a translator from Greek to Latin, talk a ton about the complexion of the emotions. I mean, they're really advanced in thinking about it, their impression that emotions have cognitive beliefs, or that's redundant, but that they have cognitions and they have affect and reaction attitudes, and you can change some of that. So that's a very insightful notion if you're thinking, say, about CBT, which is a treatment that some go for, cognitive behavioral therapy. But Stoicism, or there are people out there that call themselves Stoic therapists or the like. But for my money, if I was going for therapy, I'd go to a really, really good psychodynamic therapist, trained, either psychiatrically, medically, or I wouldn't go for someone who was reading some Stoic texts and putting that
I
together.
mean, obviously, Stoicism isn't exactly therapy, but I mean, it's not officially therapy, but it has helped numerous people in terms of getting back to a stable point in their mentality and yeah, recovering from CPTSD as just reading and learning. And I disagree. I feel like Stoicism is kind of, yeah, a very valuable tool for overcoming PTSD and CPTSD.
Okay. I would, for example, I think Seneca on meditation is weird. He tells us at night to write down all the things that you did wrong that day. Now, if I did that at night, I'd be up all night. I would be thinking, oh my God, I was short with that person. I should have said this. Oh, did I offend that person? What did I do wrong? I need to write to my student right now and tell them, whoa, I was a little too harsh in talking
But
about your
Stoicism
work.
isn't only about shame. Yeah, it's
No,
about
that's not
reflection.
shame. That's but it's some self-critiquing. And the
Right, right.
self-critiquing can get a bit heavy. It's a little like your super ego, Freud would say, going boing, 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 boing. Well, I sometimes want this stuff to bubble up. I'd like to feel. I'd like to know, what
Stoicism,
am I?
They,
going
urge you to think rationally. So you take these, bullying and harsh critiques on yourself, but then it asks you to really think rationally. Like, I was given this order. I would imagine I, am not, associated with military, but I was, yeah, told to do this in whatever circumstance. And then I think it allows for some vulnerability, but also fairness in terms of thinking about yourself and your own actions that can maybe help alleviate some of the moral
Well, it
injury.
definitely asks you to think about your own agency and how you
Mhm.
can strengthen your agency and not be subject to others' honor, a huge thing, or others' opinions of you, or others' liking or disliking. And it's a huge issue in my classrooms about social media and the plague of social media, frankly, and who's following me? Am I following enough people who follow me? What if I'm not on social media today? What will my friends think? There's so much pressure about others' opinions of them that get mirrored in that medium that they are anxious. They are so anxious. We should tamp down external views of ourselves that have to do with honor. We should think about our own goodness. We shouldn't be thinking about how many medals we have on our or how many stripes on our
Many
shoulders, or what the
accolades. Yeah.
breastplate looks like,
Mhm.
how many accolades exactly, how many prizes. That's about Homer. I didn't get the prize I wanted. So Achilles says, I just, you didn't give it to me, or Ajax. So Ajax in Sophocles' play commits suicide on stage. That's about honor. That's about a prize from someone else. And the Stoics tamp down that desire. So that's a very important message and that's a very ancient
Right.
philosophic message.
And I think
Forget what
there's
Homer was saying. Start thinking about your own goodness and
your
not
own
just
goodness.
social.
Yeah, and that's why
Social.
Stoicism is such good
Yeah.
practice for that. Because, in terms of psychology, the social dynamics, social psychology, and we are a social group and yeah, social creatures. So in a way, we do, care about, what our teammates and peers think of us and friends and family. But yeah, there's a balance because with Stoicism, you want to think about things rationally, even given that preference to fit in and belong. So yeah, I think, there's a lot of stuff that can be said for that too. And then moving on to another topic, I saw that you like dancing and you work on that too, dancing and marching in the military.
I don't
So
march
yeah,
in the
I was
military.
curious. Oh yeah, your work on march in the military. Fair. Yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on how those relate and even what types of modern dance you did. I also like to dance, but though I'm more a beginner.
So I've done modern dance a lot in my life from college onward. I haven't danced much these past few years, post-pandemic and post-pandemic. Anyway, when I was in graduate school, I danced with a teacher who was a Martha Graham dancer, and she would bring in Martha Graham specialists. She sometimes brought in some folks from Alvin Ailey as well. And then also, I lived in London for a while, and I went to the London School of Contemporary Dance, and that was fairly Graham oriented. So, it's pretty percussive, a lot of contractions, and most of what I've done is, with women who were many of them were dancers, dance teachers, which I never was, but I always liked dance. And then one year I got a fellowship at NYU to study dance sort of in the military. And I've always been thinking about emotions all my career. And so I wanted to think about emotional expression and the way in which dance and body movement expressed affect. And it does so through the ancient world onward. A lot of you see images on vases that are of dancers, or sometimes they're very flat. They look very flat. Martha Graham was herself very interested in Greek tragedy, and she put on a lot of plays. Clytemnestra is one of the more famous ones, in which she was bringing those worlds together. I mean, she put Greek tragedy to dance, and that just fascinated me. And the idea, too, of military decorum and facial expression. And I learned during my time at NYU that ballet had its beginnings in military movements. So Louis XIV took his ballet master outside to the battlefield, to the practice grounds, the training grounds, and he had them do dance steps. The whole, a lot of ballet steps. I don't want to perform here, but ballet steps of moving only, this way or épée. They have to do with how a battlefield formation moves, or how you move in a court, in the king's court. You don't look the king straight in the face. You have to sort of look to the side. So there were, and Louis
It's quite
XIV was
regimented and more choreographed kind of.
yeah, Louis XIV was a really consummate ballet dancer. And so he wanted his troops to be able to train with some of the movements that were the court movements.
Yeah, interesting. And
So I
I guess
learned that.
ballet and military are more kind of regimented and strict, like they have like their own styles. But I guess modern dances, would you say it's more free moving and flowing and kind of spontaneous? And yeah, how does that differ? And
Well,
do all of these relate to Stoicism at all, or is it kind of just separate?
no, not everything relates to Stoicism in the world.
Okay.
Thank
I
God.
was just curious about your work.
Nor does everything relate to God in the world, or everything doesn't relate to me. That's even a bigger one. Forget that idea. We should just get rid of that. Modern dance was a break from the prettiness of ballet. Ballet's pretty. And it also, as we know it, it's excruciatingly hard. I'm not a ballet dancer, and I've never done toe. But, dancing on toe is
Yeah.
really excruciating. And the life of a ballerina, if you follow any of the ballet dancers in New York or elsewhere, it's excruciating. It's a cruel industry. There's no doubt about it. It's hard to be a ballet dancer for a long, long period of time. Modern dance was meant to loosen the body, to also give it more movement. Wasn't just about the feet and arms, things out there and things up here. It
It's
was
more about feeling, do you
your
think? Like
torso,
expressing
but your
intention,
torso
feeling?
expresses a
Okay.
lot.
Mhm.
That's a Graham contraction. Ooh. Your torso and being able to use your gut were ways of being able to express things. So she had movements that no one in their right mind previously had ever thought of. But it began with Isadora Duncan and the freedom of a scarf, and there were Dennis Shawn group. There's a whole history of modern dance that was a break away from the prettiness and the
Properness, maybe, yeah, the properness of
it wasn't just
ballet.
proper. It was dainty, the
Dainty.
daintiness of ballet.
It looked dainty, but it was so painful and
Yeah,
excruciating.
excruciate, very hard on the body, but it was a way, there are different emotions that should be expressed, and also wasn't just about story of Cinderella, the story of Sleeping Beauty, the story of Swan Lake, and that's one kind of ballet, not all of it. George Balanchine also broke away from just stories. He did gorgeous movement, but in a pretty liberated, not a modern dance way, but in a way in which it wasn't just the traditional storyline.
Hmm. Okay, yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And then in terms of expressing versus feeling emotions, Stoicism at the core, a lot of it is about doing the right thing and doing things for the greater good, with the four cardinal virtues. As you know, there's lots of different personalities out in the world. Some are more expressive, some are more restrained. What did the Stoics say about that? Like in terms of how you express emotions versus how you kind of keep them inside. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think it's a mistake to think the Stoics are about suppressing emotions. That's a view about Stoicism with a little s. And it got popularized maybe in Britain, but also here, that word of being stoic, of stiff upper lip, the Brits would say.
A strong silent man, yeah.
Yeah. Or a poem Invictus, that you can, by Invictus, you could just endure anything. That's not a particularly interesting view of Stoicism. As I mentioned earlier, that Stoicism is brilliant on the emotions. But by that, I mean a conception of the emotions. I say and it's not necessarily in Marcus or Epictetus, but you could really read it in, say, Cicero, he loses his daughter to childbirth. Her name is Tullia. She dies. He's very, very close to her, and he's aggrieved. There's nothing he can do to find solace. And he leaves Rome, which is itself a risky business because he's supposed to show up to the forum. And he goes to a retreat in the Tusculan hills, and he looks on the shelves for books that might help. And he plays around with some Stoic ideas. He's a transmitter and a follower, a traveler, fellow traveler, but not necessarily a Stoic. And he outlines wonderful parts of Stoicism that you can find in the ancient Greek texts, to those that have survived. Not many have survived. But anyway, that have to do with the fact that at the heart of an emotion is a belief or judgment or a thought that you did something wrong to me. And that's one element. And then there's also the element of, and I want to do something about it, revenge or something like that. The emotion may not be the best thing. Mm-hmm. And there's also an affect. How do you show it? How is it coming out? In tears or whatnot? And he says you can rethink some of the emotion about the belief or thought. Was it, how horrible was it? Was it horrific? Is this the only way to react? Revenge? That would be in the case of anger or tears. He's trying to deal with his own tears. Should I visit the grave every day? Is that what I should do? Go to a mausoleum every day? Will that help me? And so he gives you the elements, and it's a very interesting account of emotions. It's not often, you have to sort of dig to see it and understand it, but it's a cognitivist account of a sort, and that you can change your belief or judgment slowly, but not overnight. He actually faults the Stoics for thinking that he could get rid of his unwisdom just like that. He doesn't say it would be a fool's errand, but essentially that's what he's saying.
Okay.
You should get rid of it. Yeah, it would take time.
Yeah, the magnitude of the emotion, so that, like you said, it's about beliefs and, what happens in the world versus what you believe to be true and what thoughts you have about it. Is it about kind of having wisdom and thinking about things rationally so that before things escalate to that magnitude, you kind of, understand the correct way to think that things are? Is that a little bit?
Well, I don't know if there's always a correct way to things through.
Okay.
But
more rational.
You can try to, there's a way in which you should try to be more rational. Mm-hmm. But it would be wrong to think that the Stoics are about tamping down your emotions, like making them all temperate. That would be a really ugly world. I would hate to live in that world. I want people to, I love looking at young kids that get so excited and have outbursts. And we're better than they are in some ways because we can control our outbursts. Thank God we don't have tantrums. Although many adults in public view right now do have outbursts and tantrums.
This is true.
But, the emotions have huge ranges. Mm-hmm. And it's very good to understand what you're feeling. It often takes time. I had a student recently in class who was telling me, until I read Aristotle on anger in the Rhetoric, I really didn't know what or why I was angry at my boss. Mm-hmm. I really didn't know. And it gave me a handle on thinking, my anger has certain judgments or beliefs in it that I'm in charge of. So it's there.
Okay.
I'm now going to say we're at the hour.
Okay. Yeah. Do you want to say a quick comment about your next book, or do you want to wrap it up?
Yes.
Okay,
so I'm very excited about a book I finished writing over the summer, and I'm about to plow into copy editing. It's called How to Have a Soul, What Aristotle teaches us about lasting happiness. And I do think that Aristotle is the titan, the genius, the philosopher of all ages. He was brilliant. He was a scientist, a marine biologist, collected mollusks, looked at the heavens, talked about breathing. And he talked about, the most important book in my mind is the Nicomachean Ethics. He talked about how to live well. how to flourish. And he talked about the virtues, and many of which the Stoics pick up on without necessarily attributing to him. He was in the air. There weren't books then, papyri that got, wet and lost, but he was in the air. He talks about honor and reputation. And is that your goodness? Or is your goodness here? How do you live well? And he also talks about our vulnerability. He does not shy away from the fact that we can't control everything. We cannot. And that we sometimes are subject to luck. And that's critical. How do you deal with luck? How do you deal with bad luck? How do you deal with the fact that you've come from Ukraine and you find yourself in the United States, as one of my students does? And it's not a home country he can probably return to easily. He may not have a country soon.
Yeah.
That's not something he can control. And he has to figure out ways of accepting it or knowing the limitations of agency. We're agents, we're partners. We live with people and we don't always like what they do and they don't always like what we do. So, it's the luck of the draw sometimes. And that's what Aristotle's really talking about. Self-reliance is not one of his ideas. It is rather about resilience through friendship and we are social animals. Over and over again, we are social animals, he tells us. And our goodness is in the fact that we are bolstered by others and we contribute to others' collaborative good projects, and that we develop each other and develop character in ways that support each other.
Nice. I love that. And yeah, Aristotle does predate Stoicism, but it's lovely to hear that. It's great to hear that.
He is the
inspired
ancient philosopher. His dates are,
the classics.
Yeah, he's a classical philosopher before the BCE, before the Common Era. And the Stoics, if they're 300 BCE to 300 CE Common Era,
Right.
he's
a student of Socrates and
Plato. He's a student of Socrates and Plato.
Yeah.
Yeah. 4th century.
Oh, sorry. Plato comes before Aristotle, I believe. Yeah.
The order is Socrates, Plato, Aristotle.
Right.
SPA, SPA.
I like that acronym. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Nancy. Yeah, I know you do a lot. You're writing, you're teaching, you're all over the place. So I appreciate you meeting with us. And yeah, it was great to meet you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I'm still learning how to live more stoically every day. If you are too, then you found the right place. Stay tuned with The Feminine Stoic. And if this resonated with you, maybe share it with someone who needs it too. Thank you.